Easier said than done.
And how did this all start with you in terms of, when did you start getting interested in consciousness and homeopathy? What was the trigger for that?
Well, probably like a number of people who sat in this chair, I mean, in 1967 I was 18. Okay, so I was very much on that sort of consciousness wave, that first large-scale consciousness wave that was coming in, and we were young, we didn't know what we were doing, but something seemed to be calling, and we were using illicit substances and all kinds of other things, but something was unfolding, and for me it was very much a sense that we seemed to be living right back then. I had the sense that we were living in extraordinary times, that there was some kind of breakthrough, that the old order was somehow breaking down, and that some kind of new consciousness, to do with love, to do with opening your heart, to do with a deeper understanding of things, that was all beginning to come through. So that was the first kind of connection with me, and I was lucky enough to come into contact with various mentors. One of my first mentors was a man called Keith Critchlow, who's quite a well-known architect who'd been a student of Buckminster Fuller, and was very involved in designing geodesic domes, but also very interested in sacred architecture, kind of esoteric traditions.
So what's sacred architecture?
Pyramids, cathedrals,
Okay.
all which were based on certain mathematical laws. So even then, they had a mathematical understanding of the cosmos. And that was the idea was that was enshrined in the great sacred buildings. So the great sacred buildings were not just buildings; they were instruments for allowing this consciousness that we're talking about to go on unfolding.
Right.
So all the great endeavours of human beings on the sort of spiritual side of things, whether it is sacred architecture, whether it is homeopathy, have that fundamental drive behind them to facilitate the unfolding of human consciousness and the realization of what we truly are. And so I was being introduced to that very early on. I was introduced to classical Chinese philosophy, the I Ching, Lao Tzu, that kind of thing. So that was my first kind of journeyings, and this was all happening while I was still at art school.
So you were like sort of late teens, early 20s.
Yeah, I met Keith Critchlow in probably about 1968.
Yeah.
I would have been 19, something like that, 1920, something like that. I remember very early on getting hold of a copy of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and kind of trying to read that and doggedly reading it all the way through, not understanding a word of it, of course. And I can now, a book like that has sat on my shelves for nearly 40 years, and I can now get it off the shelves and start to make some kind of sense of it.
Yeah.
So that was my first introduction, and then there was the music and all that stuff was going on. So there was this sort of early kind of expansion of consciousness going on. But I think what happened for me and for a lot of people, that there was a sudden opening. And when you have a sudden opening like that, it can actually create damage, because there are parts of your personality which haven't been integrated.
When you say sudden opening, what do you mean? Explain
I
that.
mean that having insights into the nature of existence, that everything is alive, that spirit imbues everything, that it wasn't like this kind of material world that we were living in, that there was spirit within everything, and that spirit had intention, was unfolding through everything that existed. So that was a sort of, and somehow that we were all kind of part of that. So that was a beginning sort of fundamental, I would say, would it make sense if I said an insight, an intuition, a sort of flash, like a
Yes.
lightning flash?
Yeah, right, yeah.
Like a lightning flash.
Yeah.
You know, my first glimpse,
So it changes your perception of
it
reality.
changes your perception. You know,
Yeah.
like Aldous
Yeah.
Huxley called
Yeah.
it the doors of perception.
Yeah.
And even if you've just peeked through that door, once you've peeked through it, you can't go back. Even though
you try, but it's not so easy.
Exactly, and even though in many ways you might be quite wounded, that parts of your personality, parts of your makeup would not have caught up with that, and would be still not integrated properly from the woundings of childhood or whatever. And that's, you know, another whole aspect of this, that we you know, when we talk about consciousness, we have to talk about everything that has been left out of the picture, everything that has been wounded, everything that has been denied. So it's too... Ultimately, all those things in true non-dual state, all those things come into the picture. But there can be an intermediate state where you can be glimpsing or partly living in what one might call a sort of spiritual reality, but that you've left out a whole load of stuff. And of course that stuff starts to make trouble. Because you cannot ignore... You cannot ignore anything. You cannot ignore that. What this work is about is opening to everything that you are.
Well, it's a process of integration, isn't there?
Yes,
when
exactly.
realization happens or opening happens, and that can take time, and the integration to happen. It's like a catching up, and then that's the way I find it for myself. Something I see, and I see it really clearly, but somehow it's just time for my life to adjust. Now, other people seem to move very fast with that. For me, there's always an element of time involved. And it's right, if you try and jump over it, then there's baggage that you're carrying around when you don't really need to carry that around anymore.
Yeah, you can't jump over it. You can try. But if there is something which needs integrating, something that needs accepting, something that needs including, the more you try and jump over it or ignore it or avoid it, the more it will insist. You know, like a child that is being ignored or not taken care of, it will insist that it is included, and that will appear, if it's driven out of consciousness or has never been in consciousness, then that will appear as some troublesome symptom, either psychological or, and if it's ignored there, maybe it's appearing in your dreams, that kind of thing, and if you ignore it there, then it's going to appear in your body. So, you know, coming back to homeopathy, we're setting about embracing all that. You know, let's have it all in the picture. Let's have it all in the picture.
It's almost like being a detective by the sound of it with being a homeopath. You've got to find out, you start with the physical, and then there's the psychological and the history side, there's probably genetic side as well. There's all these different clues you've got, and somehow you've got to find the right path, haven't you? The right remedy, the right time for that remedy as well.
Yes, and that, you know, homeopathy has, you know, that's not just random. There's a whole set of laws, as it were, that govern that. So, you know, we need to remember that that homeopathy is the application of a specific system. It's not random. So in homeopathy, there are ways of understanding and kind of framing what a person tells you. But also in homeopathy, you're kind of opening the door. It's like you're taking away when you really do the work on a deep level, you're kind of taking away, gradually removing the surface levels and letting that person lead you, letting that person guide you to a kind of underlying state of being.